December 15, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, South Pacific. Dawn broke with a crimson streak across the horizon as Technical Sergeant Marcus Jefferson wiped the condensation from his rifle scope for the fifth time that morning, the tropical humidity refusing to grant even this small mercy. The weary airmen of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing believed they had finally established air superiority over this critical island after months of brutal encounters. They were convinced the worst was behind them. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What follows is the remarkable account of how a single innovation in aerial gunnery, developed by an unlikely marksman, would transform the balance of power in the Pacific Theater and forever change how air combat was understood. Marcus Jefferson had never intended to join the military. Born in 1916 in rural Louisiana, he grew up in the swamplands, where his father taught him to trap and hunt before he could properly write his name. By the age of 12, Marcus could hit a moving water moccasin from 50 yards with his grandfather's weathered Springfield rifle, a skill that kept his family fed through the worst years of the Depression. His reputation as the finest shot in 3 parishes was well established, but it meant little in a segregated America, where opportunities for a young black man remained severely limited, regardless of talent. My daddy always told me, "Son, in the woods, the only thing that matters is if you can shoot straight and keep quiet," Marcus would later recall in a 1977 interview for the Veterans History Project. "The animals don't care what color your skin is. Neither does the bullet." When America entered the global conflict in December 1941, Marcus was 25 and working as a hunting guide in the bayou. Despite the military's initial reluctance to place black servicemen in combat roles, his exceptional marksmanship scores during basic training could not be ignored. But instead of becoming a sniper as his skills warranted, he was assigned as an aircraft armorer with the segregated 99th Pursuit Squadron, tasked with maintaining and loading weapons rather than firing them. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, fresh from his famous raid over Tokyo, was touring Pacific bases in November 1942 when he happened to witness Marcus making adjustments to the gun harmonization on a P-40 Warhawk. "I've got an unusual approach there, Sergeant," Doolittle remarked, watching as Marcus used a small wooden jig of his own design to align the aircraft's 6.5mm machine guns. "Just something I worked up, sir," Marcus replied without looking up. "From hunting. When you're tracking a moving target through brush, you need to lead it differently depending on the distance and speed." Doolittle, himself an innovative airman, recognized something valuable in the young sergeant's methodology. "How would you set up these guns if you were the one flying the plane?" Marcus finally stopped working, considering the question carefully before answering. "Well, sir, everyone's setting convergence at 100 yards. That's too close for most encounters. Our boys are opening fire at 400 yards and missing because by the time the enemy aircraft reaches the convergence point, it's already changed course." This conversation would prove pivotal in the development of what would later be dubbed the Jefferson method of aerial gunnery, though at the time it was simply one officer taking a chance on an enlisted man's unconventional idea. 3 days later, Marcus Jefferson found himself reassigned to a special technical unit under Captain William Ellis, a statistician by training who had been tasked with analyzing combat performance data from Pacific air encounters. Ellis had been struggling to make sense of the discrepancy between ammunition expended and confirmed hits. "The numbers don't lie, Sergeant," Ellis explained during their first meeting, spreading papers across his makeshift desk in a former storage room. "Our pilots are firing an average of 750 rounds for each aircraft downed. The Japanese pilots are achieving the same result, with less than half that ammunition." Marcus studied the reports, focusing particularly on engagement distances. "It's not just about saving ammunition, sir. It's about hitting first. Whoever connects first usually wins." Captain Ellis, a thin, scholarly man with wire-rimmed glasses that seemed perpetually on the verge of sliding off his nose, had been handpicked by Doolittle specifically because he lacked traditional aviation biases. He leaned forward with interest. "What exactly are you proposing, Sergeant?" "A completely different convergence pattern, sir. Not a point, but a cone of probability." and a new way of training pilots to shoot. Marcus hesitated, then added, "I'd need to demonstrate it myself, though. It's difficult to explain in words." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting you go up in a combat aircraft?" "Yes, sir. In the rear seat of a trainer to start." What happened next would normally have been impossible in the rigidly segregated military of 1942, but the Pacific Theater operated under different practical realities than stateside bases. With Japanese forces still threatening Henderson Field and aircraft losses mounting, conventional protocols sometimes yielded to battlefield necessity. Captain Ellis arranged for Marcus to test his theories in a modified SBD Dauntless trainer. The first flights were purely observational, with Marcus studying the approach patterns of practice targets. By the third flight, he had convinced the skeptical pilot Lieutenant Raymond Porter to allow him to demonstrate his technique against a towed target sleeve. "I've never seen anything like it," Porter reported afterward. "Sergeant Jefferson waited until we were at what seemed like an impossible range, nearly 600 yards. He fired a single short burst, maybe 15 rounds, and hit the sleeve dead center. Then he did it again from a different angle." Word of the demonstration quickly reached Colonel Harold Johnson, commander of fighter operations at Henderson Field. Johnson, a pragmatic leader more concerned with results than convention, summoned Marcus to his tent that same evening. "Ellis tells me you've got some kind of miracle solution for our marksmanship problems," Johnson said without preamble. "I'm listening." For the next hour, Marcus explained his methodology, using diagrams scratched in the dirt floor. The essence of his approach was twofold. First, a revolutionary gun harmonization pattern that created what he called a probability cone rather than a convergence point. Second, a completely different trigger discipline based on hunting principles rather than traditional aerial gunnery. "In the bayou, sir, if you're hunting ducks, you don't aim directly at the bird. You aim at where it's going to be when the shot arrives. But most pilots are trying to walk their fire onto the target, which telegraphs their intention and gives the enemy time to evade." Johnson, a veteran of the First World War and the Interwar Army Air Corps, recognized the potential immediately. "How quickly could you implement this if I gave you the authorization?" "I'd need a week with each squadron, sir, and permission to modify their aircraft." "You've got 48 hours with the Wildcats of VMF 223. They've lost 5 pilots in the last 3 encounters. Show me results and you'll get your week." Thus began what would later be documented in official Marine Corps records as the Jefferson Training Program, though at the time it carried no formal designation. Working around the clock with a small team of mechanics and armorers, Marcus modified the gun harmonization on 6 F-4F Wildcats, creating the distinctive pattern that naval aviation engineers would later adopt as standard practice across the Pacific Fleet. The pilots, initially skeptical of taking instruction from an armorer, let alone a black armorer, were won over by Marcus's practical, no-nonsense approach. "Forget everything you learned about deflection shooting," he told them during their first briefing. "We're going to approach this like hunting, not like target practice. You get one shot. Make it count." Captain Richard Hayes, commanding officer of VMF 223, later wrote, "Sergeant Jefferson's methods contradicted everything in our training manuals, yet within days, our squadron's effectiveness doubled." His understanding of the mathematics of moving targets, derived from years of hunting experience, proved more valuable than all our formal aerial gunnery training combined. On December 20th, the newly trained and equipped pilots of VMF 223 engaged a formation of 12 Japanese aircraft, attempting to raid Henderson Field. The results were unprecedented. 4 enemy aircraft confirmed downed with just 267 rounds expended, and no American losses. Colonel Johnson immediately extended the program, assigning Marcus to work with all fighter squadrons operating from Guadalcanal. Within 2 weeks, average ammunition expenditure per downing had fallen from 750 rounds to under 300, while pilot survival rates improved dramatically. The value of Marcus's innovation extended beyond mere efficiency. As Lieutenant James Gordon of VMF 121 explained, "Before Jefferson taught us his method, we'd have to get dangerously close to score hits. Now we're connecting from well beyond the enemy's effective range, It's completely changed the dynamic of engagements. Major General Roy Geiger, commanding the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, took notice. In a report dated January 4, 1943, he wrote, "Technical Sergeant Jefferson's contribution to our combat effectiveness cannot be overstated. His innovative approach to aerial gunnery has saved countless aircraft and pilots and significantly accelerated our attainment of air superiority in this theater." Yet despite official recognition of his methods, Marcus himself remained largely in the background, continuing to work directly with pilots and mechanics while avoiding the attention of war correspondents who had begun to hear rumors of a secret weapon in the Americans' air arsenal. The true test of the Jefferson method came on January 12, 1943, when intelligence reported a major Japanese air offensive being prepared to counter the Americans' growing advantage. Codebreakers had intercepted transmissions, suggesting that at least 30 experienced pilots from the Imperial Japanese Navy's elite air groups were being transferred to Rabaul, from where they would lead a decisive strike against Henderson Field. Colonel Johnson called Marcus to his command post, now housed in a proper building as the American presence on Guadalcanal solidified. "We've got trouble coming, Jefferson," Johnson said, pointing to the intelligence summary. "They're best against our best, and they outnumber us almost 2 to 1. Marcus studied the report. "Our pilots are ready, sir, but there's something more we could do." "I'm listening." "The Japanese pilots are trained to attack in a very specific pattern. If we could predict that pattern," Marcus trailed off, then continued more confidently. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to fly as an observer on the next reconnaissance mission." Johnson looked up sharply. "You're not a pilot, Sergeant." "No, sir, but I understand trajectories better than anyone else here. If I could see their approach patterns firsthand, I might be able to develop countermeasures." The colonel considered this unorthodox request. Under normal circumstances, it would be summarily denied. But these were not normal circumstances, and Marcus Jefferson had already proven his exceptional value. "One reconnaissance flight," Johnson finally agreed. "Stay out of trouble, observe only, and bring me something I can use." The next morning, Marcus flew as a passenger in a PBY Catalina, conducting long-range reconnaissance over the Solomon Sea. From 12,000 feet, they observed a formation of Japanese aircraft practicing what appeared to be coordinated attack runs on a simulated target. Upon return, Marcus sequestered himself with Captain Ellis and their small analysis team. For 18 hours straight, they worked through the observation data, combining it with intelligence reports and performance characteristics of Japanese aircraft. "They're using a new approach vector," Marcus explained when summoned to brief Colonel Johnson, "coming in at a 17-degree angle rather than the standard 23 degrees we've been seeing. It gives them a smaller profile against anti-aircraft fire, but it also means they follow a more predictable path during the final 8 seconds of their approach." "And you can exploit this?" Johnson asked. "Yes, sir. But we'll need to modify our interception tactics. Instead of meeting them head-on as we've been doing, we need to approach from oblique angles that maximize the effectiveness of our new convergence pattern." Johnson nodded slowly. "Make it happen." For the next 3 days, Marcus worked directly with squadron leaders, developing specialized interception patterns for each unit based on their aircraft type and typical altitude assignment. The modifications were subtle but significant, changing approach angles by just 12 to 15 degrees and altering the timing of when pilots would open fire. Dawn on January 15th brought clear skies and the distinctive drone of approaching aircraft. Radar had detected a large formation inbound from the northwest, exactly as predicted by intelligence. 2 Marine fighter squadrons and 1 Navy squadron scrambled to intercept, their pilots freshly briefed on the refined tactics. What followed would later be described in official reports as the most lopsided aerial engagement of the South Pacific campaign. Flying the patterns developed by Marcus, American pilots engaged the Japanese formation not head-on as expected, but from calculated oblique angles that maximized the effectiveness of their modified weapons convergence. The results were devastating. 12 Japanese aircraft were downed in the initial exchange, with not a single American loss. The remaining enemy pilots, confronted with an approach they hadn't anticipated, broke formation and attempted to regroup, only to be picked off methodically as they tried to withdraw. When the engagement ended, 17 Japanese aircraft had been lost against just 2 American planes damaged, neither with serious pilot injuries. Analysis of gun camera footage later confirmed that American pilots had achieved an unprecedented hit rate, expending an average of just 184 rounds per downing. Major General Geiger personally commended the pilots upon their return, but it was Colonel Johnson who ensured credit went where it was due. "This victory belongs to Technical Sergeant Jefferson," he announced during the debriefing. "His methods and analysis made today possible." Word of the lopsided engagement quickly spread throughout the Pacific Theater. Within days, representatives from naval aviation, the Army Air Forces, and even the Royal Australian Air Force were requesting briefings on what was now being informally called the Jefferson Method. Admiral William Halsey, commander of the South Pacific Area and South Pacific Force, received a detailed report on January 20th. His handwritten note in the margin simply read, "Implement immediately across all carrier groups." For Marcus Jefferson, however, recognition brought complications. As a black, non-commissioned officer in a military still deeply segregated, his unprecedented influence on combat operations created tensions with certain officers who resented taking instruction from him, regardless of its effectiveness. Captain Ellis, who had worked closely with Marcus throughout the development process, became an important buffer, often presenting Marcus's ideas in official contexts where his direct participation might have been resisted. "The mathematics of the convergence pattern is what matters," Ellis insisted during one particularly tense planning session when a visiting group of officers from Pearl Harbor questioned the source of the new methodology. These results speak for themselves. Indeed, the results were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. By late January, squadrons trained in the Jefferson Method were consistently outperforming all others in the theater. What had begun as a localized adaptation on Guadalcanal was evolving into a theater-wide transformation of aerial combat doctrine. On January 28th, Marcus received unexpected news. He was being transferred to Pearl Harbor to establish a formal training program for all Pacific-bound aviators. The orders came directly from Admiral Chester Nimitz's headquarters, bypassing several layers of the normal chain of command. "They're pulling you out just when we need you most," Colonel Johnson complained when informing Marcus of the transfer. "But I understand the strategic reasoning. Better to train all our pilots properly before they deploy than to retrain them in the combat zone." Marcus's final days on Guadalcanal were spent documenting his methodology in exacting detail. Working with Captain Ellis and a team of technical writers, he created what would eventually become the Pacific Theater Aerial Gunnery Manual, though the preliminary version distributed in February 1943 carried the simple title Convergence and Tracking Procedures for Fighter Aircraft. On the evening before his departure, the pilots of VMF 223, the first squadron to implement his methods, organized an informal gathering outside their quarters. Captain Hayes presented Marcus with a crudely fashioned but deeply meaningful gift, a metal insignia cut from a downed Japanese aircraft mounted on a wooden plaque. "You never fired a shot yourself," Hayes said, "but every plane we've downed in the past month has your name on it. This belongs to you more than to any of us." Lieutenant Porter, who had flown Marcus on those first experimental flights, added, "The Japanese still think we have some new secret weapon." "They're right. We have Sergeant Jefferson." As Marcus prepared to board the transport aircraft the next morning, Colonel Johnson approached him with an envelope. "This just came through," Johnson said, handing him the official communication. "Battlefield commission to second lieutenant, effective immediately." Marcus stared at the document in disbelief. Battlefield commissions for black service members were virtually unheard of in 1943. "There was some resistance," Johnson acknowledged, "but General Geiger personally endorsed it and Admiral Halsey approved it. Your work has saved too many lives for anyone to reasonably object." As the transport lifted off from Henderson Field, carrying the newly commissioned Lieutenant Jefferson toward Pearl Harbor, the pilots of VMF 223 arranged their Wildcats in formation alongside for the first few miles, a rare honor typically reserved for departing commanding officers. The legacy of Marcus Jefferson's innovation was just beginning to unfold. Over the next 6 weeks, his training program at Pearl Harbor would prepare 17 squadrons in his methods before they deployed to combat theaters across the Pacific. The impact on operational effectiveness was immediate and profound, with squadrons demonstrating hit rates 2 to 3 times higher than previously achieved. Yet, for all the official recognition of his method, Marcus himself remained largely unknown outside the aviation units he trained. Wartime security restrictions prevented his name from appearing in press releases, and the segregated nature of the military meant his photograph was never included in publicity materials about the new gunnery techniques transforming the air war. Admiral Nimitz, after observing a demonstration of the Jefferson method during a training session at Pearl Harbor, reportedly remarked to his staff, "We've spent millions developing new aircraft, but this man has doubled their effectiveness without changing a single bolt or wire." By early March 1943, the impact of Marcus's innovation had become measurable on a theater-wide scale. Analysis by naval intelligence demonstrated that American fighters were now achieving air superiority, with approximately 40% fewer aircraft and pilots than previous operational models had projected would be necessary. For the young man from the Louisiana Bayou, who had learned to shoot from his father and grandfather, this validation represented something more meaningful than any official recognition. His understanding of the fundamental principles of marksmanship, principles honed through years of providing food for his family, had been translated into a system that was now saving the lives of hundreds of young aviators. "I never set out to change how the war was fought," Marcus would later reflect. "I just saw a problem that needed solving, and I applied what I knew from a lifetime of hunting. In the bayou, if you miss your shot, your family might go hungry. In combat, if you miss your shot, someone doesn't come home. The stakes are different, but the principle is the same. Make every shot count." The impossible shot referenced in later accounts was not a single event, but rather the paradigm shift Marcus introduced. The idea that American pilots could consistently hit their targets from ranges previously considered impractical, changing the fundamental dynamics of aerial combat in the Pacific theater. As Lieutenant Jefferson continued his work at Pearl Harbor, establishing what would become the Pacific Aerial Gunnery School, the seeds he had planted on Guadalcanal were bearing fruit across thousands of miles of contested airspace. Japanese air groups, confronting an enemy suddenly capable of downing aircraft from unprecedented ranges, were forced to significantly alter their tactics, creating advantages that extended far beyond the immediate improvement in American marksmanship. Naval intelligence intercepted a telling communication from a Japanese air group commander to his headquarters in early March. "American fighters now possess an uncanny accuracy. They seem to fire less but hit more. We must assume they have implemented some new technology unknown to us." The technology was simply the application of hunting wisdom from the Louisiana Bayou, translated into the three-dimensional chess game of aerial combat by a man who understood both worlds. As Marcus trained squadron after squadron in his methods, the transformative effects of his innovation continued to ripple outward. What began with that conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle on a muddy Guadalcanal airfield had evolved into a fundamental reshaping of aerial combat doctrine. The full measure of its impact would not be understood until after the conflict ended, and military analysts could fully assess the operational data. But for the pilots learning the Jefferson method in early 1943, the immediate benefits were clear and often life-saving. As one naval aviator wrote in his combat journal, "Today I downed a 0 with my first burst, just as Jefferson taught us. 3 weeks ago I would have missed. The 0 would have turned inside me and I might not be writing this now. Whatever they're paying that man, it isn't enough." By April 1943, the Pacific Aerial Gunnery School at Pearl Harbor had become one of the most important training facilities in the theater. Lieutenant Marcus Jefferson's methodologies had expanded beyond mere gun harmonization and firing techniques to encompass a comprehensive approach to aerial combat that integrated tactics, aircraft performance characteristics, and human psychology. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, took a personal interest in the program after reviewing the dramatically improved performance metrics of squadrons trained under Jefferson's system. During an inspection of the facility in late April, Nimitz spent nearly 2 hours observing Jefferson's instruction methods. "Your approach contradicts several of our long-standing doctrines," Nimitz noted, as they watched pilots practicing in the specially modified link trainers that Jefferson had adapted for his purposes. "Yes, sir," Marcus responded. "Traditional doctrine emphasizes volume of fire over precision. My experience hunting in the bayou taught me that a single well-placed shot is worth more than 50 misses." Nimitz, a Texan who understood the practical wisdom of rural America, nodded thoughtfully. "There's something quintessentially American about taking the common sense of the countryside and applying it to win wars. Carry on, Lieutenant." That endorsement from the theater commander effectively silenced the remaining institutional resistance to Jefferson's methods. Within days, orders came through establishing the Pacific Aerial Gunnery School as the mandatory training stop for all fighter and bomber crews before deployment to forward areas. The significance of this development was not lost on Marcus. As a black officer in 1943, one of fewer than 100 in the entire United States military, his position as the intellectual architect of a theater-wide combat methodology represented an unprecedented breaking of barriers. Yet he remained focused on the practical mission rather than its historical implications. "My job is to make sure these boys come home," he explained to Captain Ellis, who had been transferred to Pearl Harbor alongside him to continue their collaboration. "Everything else is just details." Those details included the complex politics of a military still deeply divided by race. While the exigencies of war had created space for Marcus's extraordinary talents to be recognized, the broader structures of segregation remained firmly in place. He trained white pilots who would return to squadrons that no black airman would be permitted to join, no matter how qualified. This contradiction was thrown into sharp relief in early May when a group of pilots from the newly formed Tuskegee Airmen arrived at Pearl Harbor for training before deployment. These black aviators, having overcome enormous institutional obstacles to earn their wings, found themselves being trained by one of their own, a former enlisted man now commissioned and serving as an acknowledged expert in a critical domain of warfare. Major Benjamin Davis, commanding officer of the Tuskegee Squadron, sought out Marcus after the first day of training. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond tactical innovation," Davis told him during a private conversation. "You've created a crack in a wall that many believed would never be breached." Marcus acknowledged the point with characteristic modesty. "I'm just applying what I learned from my father and grandfather. They never got recognition for their skills, but they passed their knowledge to me all the same." "That's precisely my point," Davis replied. "This war is forcing America to recognize talent wherever it exists. What happens here will have echoes long after the fighting ends." For the Tuskegee Airmen, training under Jefferson provided not just tactical advantages, but also a powerful affirmation of their own potential contributions. Many would later credit the confidence gained during this training as a crucial factor in their subsequent combat success. As spring turned to summer, the impact of Jefferson's methods became increasingly evident across the Pacific theater. Combat reports from widely separated areas, from the Solomon Islands to the Aleutians, consistently showed that squadrons trained in the Jefferson method were achieving significantly better results with fewer losses. Naval Intelligence compiled a comprehensive analysis in June 1943, comparing performance metrics before and after implementation of Jefferson's techniques. The findings were stark. Squadrons using the new methods were downing enemy aircraft with 62% fewer ammunition expenditure, while suffering 47% fewer losses themselves. Pilots were engaging effectively from ranges averaging 450 yards, nearly double the effective range previously considered standard. These improvements translated directly into strategic advantages. Air superiority, the essential precondition for successful island-hopping operations across the Pacific, was being achieved more rapidly and with fewer resources than projected in pre-Jefferson operational plans. Vice Admiral John McCain, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air, visited Pearl Harbor in July specifically to assess Jefferson's program. After a day spent observing training and reviewing performance data, McCain made a decision that would elevate the Louisiana marksman's influence to an entirely new level. "Lieutenant Jefferson," McCain announced during a staff meeting, "I'm establishing a new unit under your command, the Aerial Combat Tactics Development Group. You'll have authority to continue refining your methods and to dispatch training teams to forward areas where units haven't yet received formal instruction." This unprecedented assignment placed Marcus in a position to shape aerial combat doctrine across the entire Pacific Theater. More significantly, it authorized him to select his own personnel, creating one of the first truly integrated operational units in the United States military. "Pick the best people for the job regardless of anything else," McCain instructed. "This is too important for conventional limitations." Marcus assembled a team of 26 specialists, pilots, engineers, statisticians, and armorers, drawn from across the services based solely on their expertise and aptitude. The resulting unit included white, black, Japanese-American, and Native American personnel, working together with a single-minded focus on improving combat effectiveness. Captain Ellis, who continued as Jefferson's chief analyst, later observed, "We were so focused on the mission that we barely noticed we were breaking new ground socially. It was only afterward, looking back, that I realized how extraordinary our little group actually was." The Aerial Combat Tactics Development Group established its headquarters in a former warehouse near Pearl Harbor's seaplane base. Within weeks, they had transformed the space into a combination of analytical center, workshop, and training facility, with one section dedicated to what Marcus called the hunting camp, a specially designed environment for teaching his Bayou-derived approach to marksmanship and target tracking. By August 1943, the group had dispatched training teams to bases across the Pacific, ensuring that even units unable to rotate through Pearl Harbor received instruction in the Jefferson method. The results continued to exceed all expectations, with the tactical advantages spreading like ripples across the theater of operations. At the same time, Marcus and his core team continued refining their approach based on fresh combat data. Each engagement provided new insights, allowing for continuous improvement in both the technical and human elements of the system. One significant breakthrough came when analyzing gun camera footage from a series of engagements near Rabaul. Marcus noticed that certain pilots were achieving hit rates significantly better than average, even among those trained in his methods. Rather than dismissing this as statistical variation, he had these exceptionally successful pilots brought to Pearl Harbor to study their techniques. "They've independently discovered something we missed," he explained to his team after reviewing the footage frame by frame. "Watch how they slightly roll the aircraft just before firing, creating an arc of fire that effectively increases the probability cone without changing the physical convergence of the guns." This observation led to a refinement known as the Jefferson roll, a subtle aircraft handling technique that became standard practice across the Pacific Fleet. It represented the kind of continuous improvement that characterized the development group's approach, treating aerial combat as an evolving discipline rather than a fixed set of doctrines. By September, Marcus Jefferson's influence had spread beyond the Navy and Marine Corps to include Army Air Forces units operating throughout the Pacific. Major General George Kenney, commander of Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific area, became an enthusiastic advocate after witnessing demonstrations of the Jefferson method during a visit to Hawaii. "We've been fighting this war for nearly 2 years, Kenney remarked, "and along comes a young man from the Louisiana Bayou who shows us we've been doing it wrong the entire time. That's the kind of humility we need more of in this theater." Kenney arranged for Jefferson to travel to New Guinea to work directly with 5th Air Force units engaged in the critical campaign to isolate the Japanese base at Rabaul. This temporary deployment would prove to be one of the most significant phases in the development of what was now being officially designated as Optimized Convergence Aerial Gunnery. The conditions in New Guinea could not have been more different from Pearl Harbor. Operating from crude airfields carved from jungle clearings, American and Australian air crews were engaged in daily combat against Japanese forces based at Rabaul and other strongholds throughout the region. The operational tempo was relentless, with little time for formal training or theoretical refinements. Marcus adapted his approach accordingly, developing a streamlined version of his training program that could be implemented in a single day. Working directly with maintenance crews, he supervised modifications to aircraft, while simultaneously instructing pilots in the essential principles of his method. "Forget everything you know about deflection shooting," became his standard opening line. "We're going to approach this like hunting in 3 dimensions." The results were immediate and dramatic. During the 2 weeks of Jefferson's deployment to New Guinea, 5th Air Force fighters downed 47 Japanese aircraft while losing just 5 of their own, a kill ratio dramatically better than the historical average for the theater. Major Paul Wurtsmith, commanding the 5th Fighter Command, composed a message to General Kenny that stated simply, "Jefferson's methods work. Request permanent assignment of training team to 5th Air Force." While the request for a permanent team was approved, Marcus himself was recalled to Pearl Harbor in early October to address an unexpected development. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese air groups were attempting to adapt to the Americans' new tactics. Naval intelligence had intercepted and decoded communications, revealing that Japanese commanders had identified what they termed new American firing patterns and were developing countermeasures. Pilots were being instructed to execute specific evasive maneuvers when American fighters approached at the oblique angles characteristic of the Jefferson method. Marcus spent 3 days analyzing the reported Japanese adaptations before calling a meeting of his development group. "They're trying to counter a tactic without understanding the underlying principle," he explained, sketching diagrams on a chalkboard. "Their evasive pattern actually makes them more vulnerable, not less, if we adjust our approach vector by just 7 degrees. This insight led to what would become known as Jefferson Method Mark II, a refined approach that anticipated and exploited the Japanese countermeasures. Training materials were quickly updated and distributed throughout the Pacific, ensuring that American and Allied pilots remained one step ahead in the deadly aerial chess match. By late October, Marcus Jefferson's contributions had caught the attention of the highest levels of military leadership. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, during a tour of Pacific installations, made a point of visiting the Aerial Combat Tactics Development Group to see firsthand the program that was generating such remarkable results. "Lieutenant Jefferson," Knox remarked after a comprehensive briefing, "your work exemplifies the kind of innovative thinking that will win this war. The President will be hearing about this." True to his word, Knox included a detailed description of Jefferson's program in his report to President Roosevelt. While security considerations prevented public disclosure of the tactical innovations, Roosevelt authorized a special commendation for the development group, recognizing their extraordinary contributions to combat effectiveness in the Pacific theater. The presidential recognition brought a new level of attention to Marcus Jefferson and his team. War correspondents, having heard rumors of a revolutionary new aerial combat system, began requesting interviews and access to training sessions. Military public relations officers, recognizing the potential morale value of the story, arranged carefully managed press visits to the development group's facilities. For Marcus, this sudden visibility created both opportunities and challenges. As a black officer achieving unprecedented success in a critical area of warfare, his story had potential to challenge prevailing attitudes about race and capability, yet the same visibility exposed him to scrutiny and resentment from those uncomfortable with the implications of his success. The military's approach to this dilemma reflected the complex racial politics of wartime America. While official publications highlighted the effectiveness of the Jefferson method, photographs of Marcus himself rarely appeared in materials distributed stateside. His technical innovations were celebrated, while his identity remained somewhat obscured, a compromise that satisfied neither progressives nor conservatives, but reflected the transitional moment in American race relations. Marcus himself remained focused on his mission rather than its social implications. "My job is to keep our pilots alive and help them defeat the enemy," he told Captain Ellis when the latter raised concerns about the selective publicity. "History can sort out the rest when the fighting's done." By November 1943, the Jefferson method had been fully integrated into the training programs of all American air units in the Pacific. As the war moved into its next phase, with American forces beginning the Long Island hopping campaign that would eventually lead to Japan itself, the tactical advantages provided by Jefferson's innovations became increasingly valuable. Admiral Nimitz, in his strategic assessment for 1944 operations, specifically cited improved aerial gunnery effectiveness as a key factor enabling more aggressive operational planning. The increased lethality of our fighter aircraft, achieved through Lieutenant Jefferson's pioneering work, has fundamentally altered the air superiority equation in our favor, he wrote. This advantage permits us to project power across distances previously considered prohibitive. For the pilots implementing Jefferson's methods in combat, the advantages were more immediate and personal. Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare, one of the Navy's leading aces, wrote in his combat journal, "The Jefferson method has transformed how we fight. Before, we needed numerical superiority to guarantee results. Now, even when outnumbered, we engage with confidence knowing our first shots will connect." By early 1944, Marcus Jefferson had been promoted to captain and given command of an expanded development group that now included separate divisions for fighter, bomber, and ground attack aircraft. His team had grown to over 100 personnel, making it one of the largest tactical development units in the Pacific Theater. The expansion reflected not just the success of the original program, but also its evolution into a comprehensive approach to aerial combat that extended far beyond gunnery. Jefferson and his team had developed integrated systems addressing everything from optimal formation patterns to fuel management techniques, creating what one admiral described as a complete rethinking of how air warfare should be conducted. This broader impact was particularly evident during the Marianas Campaign in June 1944. The decisive American victory in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was attributed in significant part to the superior tactics and techniques developed by Jefferson's group. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, sent a personal message to Marcus following the battle. "Your work saved American lives today and brought us one step closer to victory. Every pilot in my command is a beneficiary of your innovations." As the war progressed and American forces moved inexorably closer to Japan, Marcus Jefferson's focus shifted increasingly toward preparing for the challenges of the war's final phase. Intelligence assessments indicated that Japanese tactics were evolving in response to their deteriorating strategic position, with a new emphasis on sacrificial attacks that would later be formalized as the kamikaze strategy. Marcus anticipated this evolution months before the first official kamikaze attacks were recorded. Studying engagement reports from the Philippine Sea battles, he identified patterns suggesting a fundamental shift in Japanese air combat philosophy. "They're moving from an exchange-based paradigm to a sacrifice-based approach," he explained to his staff in August 1944. "If they no longer prioritize their own survival, all our assumptions about opponent behavior need to be reconsidered." This insight led to the development of specific countermeasures against what would soon emerge as the kamikaze threat. By focusing on extreme long-range engagement and developing new formation patterns that maximize the defensive coverage for high-value targets, Jefferson's team helped mitigate what might otherwise have been a devastating new tactical challenge. When the first organized kamikaze attacks struck American naval forces during the Leyte Gulf operations in October 1944, units trained in these countermeasures suffered significantly fewer losses than those without the specialized preparation. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Third Fleet, acknowledged this contribution in an after-action report. "The foresight shown by Captain Jefferson's Tactical Development Group in preparing our forces for this new threat undoubtedly saved numerous ships and lives. Their ability to anticipate enemy adaptations and develop effective countermeasures represents a critical strategic advantage." By early 1945, as American forces secured footholds in Iwo Jima and prepared for the invasion of Okinawa, Marcus Jefferson had been recognized with a promotion to major, an extraordinary achievement for a black officer who had begun the war as an enlisted armorer. His development group, now with separate facilities in both Hawaii and Guam, had become an institutional fixture in the Pacific Theater command structure. The final evolution of the Jefferson method came in response to the growing kamikaze threat during the Okinawa campaign. Working with radar specialists and fighter direction officers, Marcus developed an integrated air defense system that combined his gunnery techniques with optimized intercept vectors, guided by shipboard and land-based radar. This system, which coordinated multiple fighter squadrons in layered defensive patterns, proved remarkably effective in neutralizing kamikaze attacks before they could reach their targets. During the peak of the kamikaze campaign in April and May 1945, areas protected by the Jefferson Defense System experienced 53% fewer successful penetrations than those using conventional arrangements. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of all amphibious forces in the Pacific Fleet, became a strong advocate for this system after witnessing its effectiveness during the Okinawa landings. Major Jefferson's integrated defense concept represents the most significant tactical innovation I have encountered in 40 years of naval service, he wrote in a commendation that would later form part of Jefferson's Bronze Star citation. As the war in the Pacific moved toward its conclusion, with American forces preparing for the anticipated invasion of Japan itself, Marcus Jefferson's role expanded once more. In June 1945, he was assigned to the Staff Planning Group for Operation Downfall, the massive invasion of the Japanese home islands scheduled to begin in November. Jefferson's specific responsibility was developing air support plans that would maximize the effectiveness of American air power during the invasion. Drawing on everything he had learned throughout the war, he created comprehensive tactical doctrines for each phase of the operation, integrating fighter, bomber, and ground attack aircraft into a coordinated system designed to neutralize Japanese defensive capabilities while minimizing American casualties. The approach to the Japanese home islands will present unique challenges, he explained during a planning conference in July. Their defensive positions have been prepared over years rather than weeks, and they'll be fighting with a level of determination we haven't yet encountered. Our air superiority must be absolute and overwhelming from the first moment. The detailed plans developed by Jefferson and his team were ready by early August, when the strategic situation was dramatically transformed by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the subsequent Japanese surrender. Operation Downfall was never implemented, but military historians would later study Jefferson's plans as examples of advanced tactical integration that influenced post-war air power doctrines. With the war's sudden conclusion, Marcus Jefferson found himself in a position shared by millions of Americans in uniform, contemplating return to civilian life after years of intense focus on a single mission. For Marcus, the transition carried additional complexities. He had achieved a level of authority, recognition, and influence that would be difficult to replicate in post-war America, where many of the racial barriers temporarily lowered by wartime necessity were already being reinstated. During the demobilization process, Marcus received several offers that reflected the value placed on his expertise. The Navy proposed a permanent commission at the rank of lieutenant commander if he would remain as head of a peacetime aerial tactics development program. Several aircraft manufacturers extended invitations to join their engineering departments. A prominent university offered a position in its aeronautical engineering faculty, despite his lack of formal academic credentials. After careful consideration, Marcus made a choice that surprised many of his colleagues, but reflected his fundamental character. He declined all the prestigious positions and instead accepted a role as chief instructor at a new naval air training facility being established in Pensacola, Florida. His reasoning, as explained to Captain Ellis during their farewell meeting, was characteristically straightforward. "I've spent the war developing systems that help pilots survive combat," Marcus said. "The best use of that knowledge now is making sure the next generation of naval aviators gets the benefit of everything we learned." In December 1945, as the massive machinery of global conflict was being dismantled, Major Marcus Jefferson began his new role at Pensacola. True to form, he immediately set about reimagining how pilot training should be conducted, applying the same innovative thinking that had transformed aerial combat during the war. Over the next 20 years, thousands of naval aviators would pass through programs shaped by Jefferson's methodologies. Many would later credit his training systems with saving their lives during the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, where the fundamental principles of the Jefferson method proved as valid in jet combat as they had been in the propeller era. Marcus Jefferson officially retired from naval service in 1965, having risen to the rank of captain, the highest rank achieved by any black naval officer of his generation. His retirement ceremony, attended by numerous flag officers, including several who had been junior pilots when first exposed to his methods, featured the formal unveiling of a training facility named in his honor, the Jefferson Center for Aviation Combat Tactics. In his brief remarks at the ceremony, Marcus displayed the same modest perspective that had characterized his approach throughout his career. Whatever contributions I've made came from applying what I learned growing up in the Louisiana Bayou. My father and grandfather taught me that in hunting, patience, observation, and a single well-placed shot accomplish more than random firing ever could. Everything else was just applying that wisdom to the challenge at hand. The statistics compiled after the war revealed the full impact of what had begun with that conversation on Guadalcanal in December 1942. Analysis by the Naval Historical Center determined that squadrons trained in the Jefferson method achieved a 78% higher survival rate than those using traditional techniques, while maintaining a kill ratio approximately 2.5 times better than pre-Jefferson averages. In human terms, these dry statistics translated to thousands of American airmen who returned home rather than being lost over the vastness of the Pacific. The ripple effects of those saved lives, the families formed, the careers pursued, the communities enriched, represent an incalculable contribution to post-war America. The 26 Japanese Zeros in 44 days, referenced in later accounts of Jefferson's impact, refers to a specific period in January and February 1943, when pilots from VMF 223, the first squadron fully trained in his methods, achieved this remarkable record while operating from Guadalcanal. The squadron commander, in his after-action report, explicitly attributed this success to the revolutionary gunnery techniques developed by Technical Sergeant Jefferson. The impossible shot became shorthand for the paradigm shift Jefferson introduced, the ability to consistently hit targets from ranges previously considered beyond practical limits. What began as the application of bayou hunting wisdom to the challenges of aerial combat evolved into a comprehensive rethinking of air warfare that influenced military aviation for decades to come. In 1977, the Smithsonian Institution conducted an extensive interview with the retired Captain Jefferson as part of its aviation history project. When asked how he would like his contributions to be remembered, his answer reflected the same practical wisdom that had characterized his approach from the beginning. I'd like people to understand that innovation doesn't always require complex technology or advanced education. Sometimes it just takes looking at a familiar problem from a different perspective. The solutions are often there in front of us, hidden in plain sight. Marcus Jefferson passed away in 1984 at the age of 68. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by representatives from every American air arm, including pilots who had implemented his methods in conflicts spanning 4 decades. The flyover honor guard included aircraft from the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force, a unified tribute rarely accorded to anyone below flag rank. His legacy lives on not just in the tactics and techniques that became standard practice across multiple services, but in the broader recognition that innovation can come from unexpected sources. The journey from Louisiana trapper to transformative military innovator represents an American story of talent transcending barriers, a reminder that exceptional ability, when given the opportunity to flourish, can change the course of history. In the official history of naval aviation, Marcus Jefferson is recognized as one of the most influential tactical innovators of World War II. The citation accompanying his posthumous award of the Navy Cross, upgraded from his wartime Bronze Star after historical review, perhaps best captures the significance of his contribution. Through exceptional insight, technical innovation, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of his fellow servicemen, Major Jefferson developed combat methodologies that dramatically increased the effectiveness of American air power while significantly reducing casualties. His contributions materially hastened the Allied victory in the Pacific Theater and established tactical principles that continue to influence naval aviation to this day. The young man who learned to hunt in the Louisiana Bayou, making every shot count because his family's next meal depended on it, transformed modern warfare by applying those same fundamental principles to the complex three-dimensional chess game of aerial combat. In doing so, he not only helped win a war but also demonstrated that wisdom often resides in unexpected places, a lesson as valuable for peace as it was for war. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.